we come down to the concept of attribution. Attribution is where you say who gave you the information or what source you got the information. It's basically answering this question, who told you that? I mean, and we call that attribution. You'll find every journalism report littered with attribution. They'll say, so-and-so said, so-and-so said, Smith said, Jones said, according to the Times, according to the newspaper, according to a press release, according to a recent study, all this stuff. So those are important things to keep in mind. Now, I want to caution you real quick because I just used the word according to several times. You can use the word according to, but there are a few words like, as far as attributing information to people, typically you prefer to use the word said, so-and-so said, so-and-so stated, but even stated is perhaps not as preferable. According to can come across as perhaps a little troublesome because if I said, well, according to so-and-so, this is what happened. If, depending on how somebody reads that, they could be taking that as you kind of tongue-in-cheek said, well, according to Bob, that's the way it is. And so I always warn you a little bit ahead of time, be careful about using the word according to, because according to can suggest that you're skeptical of the source. So I would suggest, by and large, avoid using the words according to. But basically it's just telling you where you got the information. The key is, in journalism, is we want to know where you got your information from. I mean, did you get this information just by somehow divine right, divine knowledge? Tell us, from whom this information came. Don't just assume everybody knows. Tell us. Another thing is, in journalism, we prefer to get information from people rather than online or according to a book or according to something else. The simple reality is, first of all, books and things posted online can change, can be inaccurate. People make stuff up. It's better to talk to an official source, somebody who knows what they're talking about, somebody who is in charge, who can tell you straight up what's going on. They're more likely to get the facts right. Things aren't going to change. Their name's on it. They're going to give it to you. So just make sure to keep that in mind. Now, almost every paragraph in a news story should have some form of attribution. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if you go pick up the paper, and this will actually, I will either bring in papers or have you look it up online as an assignment in class. One of the things we will do is I want you to look and just say, hey, how much attribution is there in this story? What you'll find is almost every single sentence in a story has attribution. It will say, Smith said, Jones said, Billy, so-and-so said, he said, she said, according to this, according to that. I mean, attribution is all throughout. Every paragraph should have attribution. If you don't give attribution, a lack of attribution suggests you personally observe something or you personally know something. Attribution is basically a way of saying, this is where I got my information from. If you don't give attribution, the assumption is the person whose name is at the top of the page knows it for some reason. I don't know how you know it. I don't know why you know it, but you know it. And oftentimes, it's like, there were 73 people there. Okay. Well, if you don't write, there were 73 people there, the sheriff said, or the organizer said, or the company said, then they're going to assume that you went through and counted the number of people there. Simple fact. I mean, that's the way it is. Attribution tells you where you got it. If you don't attribute it, the assumption is you gave it. You came up with it. And if you're not coming up with it, and you're not the one giving it, then you're lying. And you're plagiarizing, you're stealing. I don't know, not plagiarizing, but you're being deceitful. And so you need to attribute your information. Now, before we go too far, we need to discuss the style for attribution. The case is that, depending upon what you're doing with attribution, there's different styles for it. For example, in broadcasting, oftentimes the attribution comes before. The attribution is simply the name of the person who said it, their title. Well, we should start off with it. It's usually said, or another, or another term for saying. Okay, it usually has the name of the source, whether that be a person or a magazine or whatever, and then it usually has a title, and the title could be a formal title. It could even be a non-formal title. It could be like a spokesman or a speaker or a person authorized to talk. Usually, Joe Smith, who works for the company. Somehow it gives a title or their role. Now, the only exception would be sometimes if you're going to like a charity event and you talk to somebody who's there, you might said Joe Smith. Well, you might just say who was attending, or said participant so-and-so, but that becomes a title or a role. And so you always let us know why you're actually talking to this person. So you need to make sure you always have, said or says, somehow attributes it, name, and then their role or their title. Now, the difference in styles for this is in broadcasting, this title or the attribution always comes before what you say. So in broadcasting, you'll usually say, Joe Smith says that we're going to be doing this, or the mayor says we're going to be doing this. The mayor says the taxes will have to be raised, or the mayor says that this is going to be a great imposition to the municipality, blah, blah, blah. But if you're writing it, whether it be online or print, you always put your attribution after the fact. Why? Because, it becomes cumbersome. We want to give you the information. We want to attribute it, but we don't need to tell you who said it up front. We can give it to you after the fact. So in writing, they'll say, the taxes are going to go up, comma, the mayor said, something like that. Or there could be quite a problem for this. There will be quite a problem from these new rules for the city, comma, the mayor said. But the case is the person saying it isn't as important and doesn't have to be said up front. Whereas part of the reason is that, it's partially just, it becomes cumbersome and clanky. Whereas in broadcast, you can usually give a quick statement. It isn't as if the reporter is saying it. You're clearly distinguishing beforehand. And so that's part of the reason why you do it. You're saying these are the words from the mayor, and you're telling people beforehand. Whereas with print, you can put the statement out there and then attribute it at the end, and it works because people just read it and process the information differently. With broadcast, you are processing the information linear format, meaning you're taking it in the order you got it. Whereas with print, people they read it and they can put together that attribution after the fact and know that the information before that was what came from that person. And you don't have to do that, and people can process that in their brain differently. Now, there are exceptions. Only goes before when? Oh. Oh, I'd say that there is one case. I was going to say there is an exception. I was trying to figure out what this quote's saying. Is only goes before in print. It only goes before the name in print is if it's important to know who it came from. Sometimes if somebody's stating an opinion, we will oftentimes put it before the name or before the statement. So, for example, the mayor said that this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Well, the worst thing, it's the worst thing that ever happened, the mayor said. Depending upon the argument, some people would say, well, in print, sometimes you really need to draw up that that's an opinion and you'll put it beforehand. If you really feel like it's an opinion and you need to state who's saying it beforehand, then you put it beforehand. But if it's just information, then I would put it afterwards. So I was just going to say there is an exception that sometimes you can in print or in online or other written forms, you can put it beforehand. But that's really more of a case where it's purely supposed to be done beforehand because it's opinion. Now, other things to keep in mind, broadcasting usually uses present tense. Why? Because they're going to use canned footage of people. They're going to use video. They're going to use other things. And so what happens is broadcasting tends to use present tense because you're watching the person say it. And so the mayor says this, the mayor says that. You're actually relaying the information in a present form. So that's part of their style. Written formats tend to use it in the past tense because I'm telling you what the mayor said that I wrote about. I talked to the mayor said it, I'm now writing about it. And so that happened as what they did say versus what they are saying. This is an important distinction because the other thing is there might be a little bit of a legal matter if the mayor said, well, I said that, but I changed my mind, and you said I was saying that, and I'm not saying it. I don't know that would hold any water in a court of law, but there is a little bit of, we're writing, you're reading, it clearly was said, whereas in broadcasting, there is a sense of being in the moment, and so that is a little bit different style. Another thing about attribution besides that is, I said you need to give the first, you need to have the name first and last. Or I'm sorry, you need the name, the title, and then somehow saying like they said, or they stated, or they uttered, whatever word you want to use. And I mean, I'm free to use it. I think said is just a basic, simple one. Sometimes you can use a different word. If you have somebody who's kind of stammering, you might use the word stammered, but avoid doing that too much, because you don't want to be tainting your reader. You want to give the information to the reader and let them draw conclusions. Don't just say somebody was stammering. But the first reference is what we refer to the first time you see a name in a story. So for example, if you're reading a story, there's a difference between first and second reference. A first reference is the very first time you read somebody's name. So for example, if I'm talking and I say, said Governor Bruce Rauner. Well, the first time I use that, I am probably going to say, Governor Bruce Rauner. The first time I say it is going to be, it's called the first reference, first time his name is used in the story. Second reference is the second time it's used. The first time you use it, you really should give both the first and last name as well as the person's title. The second time, you just need their last name. Now, there are some exceptions to this first versus last name rule. The first exception is that if two people share the same last name, suppose you have a story about the Rauners moving to Springfield. You'd want to have, maybe if you're getting quotes from both Bruce and his wife, I believe it's Diana, you would probably want to use both first and last name. The other thing is minors or children who are under the age of 18, we usually use the first name. Children are usually used with the first name. Now, there are some exceptions to this first name with minors rule. One of the exceptions is that sometimes with crime reports, we will use their last name, because it's kind of weird to say, like, Billy Johnson killed 14 people. Little Billy, calling him Billy when he's just committed a murder, or Billy, Johnson, who's been involved with a gang since he's 14, committed murder at 16. Billy is going to be tried. Billy is going to do this. We probably should just refer to him as Johnson in that case. We probably shouldn't use the first name, because it's probably going to be problematic. The other thing is the exception would be, depending upon the tone of it, depending upon it, we might use their last name. On the other hand, and this is one of these where it becomes a controversy, but things like where a person who's under 18 gets killed. For example, Trayvon Martin. You can refer to him as Trayvon. He was under 18 when he was killed, or when he was shot and killed, using his first name is perfectly acceptable. But somebody like, say, for example, some people might say, well, why don't you refer to Michael Brown as Michael? Well, because Michael Brown is 18 when he was killed, and so we would use the last name. It's just a matter of being a minor. The other exception might be style of writing. Sometimes with a feature where you're doing a story about somebody, sometimes it becomes acceptable to just use their first name. That's pretty rare, but it is something that sometimes happens. It's kind of one of those, like, you might write it in the first you might write their name, first name, because you think it sounds better, like to say Bill did this, or Joe did this, or Richard did this, because everybody keeps referring to him as Richard throughout the story. But the problem is you'll eventually get an editor who will say, well, I think people can distinguish between a quote when they're referring to him by his first name and the fact that his last name is something else. I mean, most editors will be a little picky. Rarely do people let you break the rule and use the first name. But the key is first reference, use both first and last, as well as give some indication of who the person is. And then after that, you just use their last name. I will return to this discussion momentarily.